Hello and welcome to my RhetCanada 2021 presentation, largely about the origins of the special issue 8.1 of Rhetor, the Journal of the Canadian Society for the Study of Rhetoric. The kinds of intellectual background to it, the kinds of social background to it, the work I hope it's doing, and then I'll end with a little bit about me. And where I see this fitting into my trajectory. So I've often had a hard time explaining to folks what RhetCanada is and why I go every year. It's the only conference I go to nearly every year of all rhetoric conferences in North America and the world. And my answer is complicated because people usually say, well, it's NCA or RSA or the 4Cs for Canada, and it's none of those things. Or it's Isher or Asher for Canada. And it's not those things either, though there is a kind of shared history with the International Society for the History of Rhetoric, at least in some early founding figures. But to say it's not those things, well, that doesn't help. I sometimes said to folks, well, it's what a rhetoric conference would look like if it wasn't inextricably bound with the questions of teaching public speaking or first-year writing. And that's true too, but that doesn't actually help you see what it is, only see what it isn't by comparison to the major American societies that construct it. I try to say, well, it meets in plenary for 3 days. So you don't give a paper, you give and partake in a 3-day conversation. And one of the most amazing things about the conference is the way the author of a paper from Tuesday afternoon will ask questions of someone giving a paper on Wednesday morning. And you suddenly realize all the ways that our work is in conversation with each other, and we are in conversation with each other. And that's a wonderful feature, but it's not unique to RhetCanada. It could be true of any other discipline's 3-day conference if it were to be structured in the same way. Because I have a background in the rhetoric of science with my graduate degree a long time ago, but it sticks with you, it sticks with you. I'm curious about these from a kind of rhetoric of inquiry / sociology of disciplines kind of perspective. But also over time, it became a kind of personal quest to understand the community that I was attempting to join and have joined. So around 2016 in the conference in Calgary, in between sessions, if somebody was standing next to the coffee bar, I would ask them, well, what does it mean to you to be a Canadian rhetorician? And the conversations were fascinating. Always a handful of folks for whom they see themselves as rhetoricians who happen to live in Canada because they engage in an international or transnational agenda, which they don't feel is rooted in Canadianness, because the phenomenon that they're studying, they believe is a transnational or perhaps even fundamental to human communication project. And so they are rhetoricians in Canada and not Canadian rhetoricians. But other folks for whom a profound sense of place and history shapes them as a person, shapes the intellectual questions that move them. And as Canada is struggling to understand itself in the 21st century, their work feeds into that self-understanding, the development of, critique of, and perhaps growth of an exciting new understanding of the Canadian state. You'll see lots of different pieces like this. There are also, frankly, some very, very personal pieces, people who come to the United States or come from the United States to Canada, and the act of migration helps them realize the extent to which their intellectual shape is determined in part by their biography. You'll also see some pieces which complicate that, for whom an intersectional identity, an identity which intersects with their Canadian identity, complicates this narrative of shaping an intellectual trajectory in terms of one's biography. I started to learn more about who my colleagues were and I realized these were stories that I wanted to share. By the 2017 conference in Ryerson University in Toronto, we had a stack of initial early essays as a kind of proof of concept that I could present to my colleagues and say, hey, I think we got a special issue here. I think we have a really powerful special issue filled with cool essays. And the assembled approved it, and over time, more members who have seemed interested and interesting have contributed additional essays. The last one I think was added maybe, I don't know, a year ago, October. So the document is evolving, and perhaps as the organization evolves, we can come to revisit this question of who we are as RhetCanada and the way that national identity shapes it, and transnational identity, right? RhetCanada, Tanya Smith, perhaps the single most significant leader of the organization in the last decade, has repeatedly said it's an international organization housed in Canada. And nowhere is that clearer than in noting the strong Belgian contingent of authors for the special issue and the strong Belgian participation in the conference. Having two languages helps us reach across an ocean, right? The special issue is shaped by geography. It's organized by geography. So there are sections about the major research centers in Canada, in addition to a section with Belgian scholars. There's a section about the University of Waterloo, which has the largest developed doctoral program in rhetorical studies. There is a section about Saskatchewan and Alberta, which are two places where one can do doctoral study in rhetoric through other programs. And a section about Winnipeg, which is home to, I think, the first freestanding rhetoric writing and communication program in Canada. All of these universities homes to clusters of faculty who are doing significant work in rhetorical studies. Additionally, a section for folks who didn't quite fit in those early categories. Canadians who'd come abroad and were now in the United States, but still strong members of the association, or members who had retired from teaching and research. Just a cool collection of folks. It's a great special issue if you want to know how the scope of a life can feed the shape of a career. I'm going to pause there for a second. Final part of what I wanted to talk about today is the well, my colleague read the introduction and said, David, you don't actually talk about why this is important to you and where you think you fit into all of this, which I suppose is the case when you're an editor and trying to pull things together, and maybe trying to get out of the way a little bit, right? So just two things to say. I have been a fellow for internationalization at the University of Minnesota, and I want to thank them for all the support they've given me over time and years on this work and project. In any case, one of the key pieces I read there was about the relationship between the local self and the cosmopolitan self by Gavin Sanderson, and how if we're going to be ready to become internationalized, then we are going to have to, no, you can't just leap to become a cosmopolitan scholar, right? The best way to step towards becoming a cosmopolitan is to understand your localness first, right? And some of this is supported by, for example, scholars in rural sociology who are hopeful that we don't just see cosmopolitanism as something that elites engage in, but something the everyday person is embedded in, that migrant laborers are in some sense cosmopolitans because their labor and the economic fruits of their labors move across borders. So to recognize the local first before we become the global. And that's really important to me. And I realized that this was a way of collecting those really local stories as part of then stepping onto an international stage for the society. I also kind of want to just add one more anecdote here at the end, recognizing that local self, especially that kind of not typically cosmopolitan local self, right? I'm a first generation college student, first generation graduate student, first generation professor type. Those are pretty hip lingos on the academic Twitter nowadays. And what I'm also shooting for as I think about these things is the kind of sense of the novel, the new, the unusual sense that every first generation student has when they walk into a university classroom, and things are different and you don't understand why. And you want to know why things are the way they are. You want to understand, this is one of my favorite anecdotes from one of my first generation students, why it is that in high school you're not allowed to write in your textbooks, but in college you are. That is an amazing kind of recognition of how there are norms for something that for the academic world that we don't always see. And I kind of wanted us to tell stories that would make those norms and the narratives that make those norms happen for people visible. I should have written this down first, sorry. I want to make the stories that make our society and our academic community visible. So that's what I did. Anyway, it's a good issue. I hope you'll read it. I hope the society benefits from it, and I will talk to you soon.